Hey everybody, it's Jay Baer, customer experience author, speaker, expert, advisor, and I am back with my friends from Stream Realty talking about the power of customer experience in the commercial office world. I'm joined again by Adam Showalter. We spoke, I don't know, like 6-8 months ago or something like that, Adam, and we're back with an update on what you're doing with X2. Joined also this time by Preston Young from Stream Realty. Gents, I think it'd be great maybe if Preston, you could give us a little level set on kind of what Stream Realty does in case folks aren't fully aware.
Yeah, you bet. So we're in the commercial real estate industry, like you said, and really focus on three products: office, industrial, and data centers. And within those products, we are a full service provider. So we'll do leasing, tenant representation, property management, development management, construction management, you name it. And in the 15 locations where we are across the country. But then on top of that, we also have an investment platform that invests in acquisitions as well as developments on an opportunistic basis.
Preston, you're the national head for investor services at Stream, and as Adam and I talked about before, you're testing a new hospitality-driven approach to property management. It's certainly a differentiator for Stream, and the fact that you also own properties is also something a little different than most folks in the category. You call this differentiator X2, extraordinary and incredibly profound workplace experiences. Why? What inspired you to even go down this path to begin with?
Yeah, I think that, we've seen the office world just continue to evolve, over the past 20, 30 years. And, you look at where maybe 20 years ago, if an office building had a fitness center or a conference center, that was a very special thing. And then every office building then had a fitness center and a conference center. And that arms race has just only continued. And it's really kind of continued to a point where, pretty much tapped out on what the physical attributes needed to be to a building. And so what is that differentiator that we've seen? Well, we've seen trends towards hospitality from an architectural standpoint, from a sensory standpoint, particularly in the lobbies. And then the experience standpoint was really kind of the last thing that office owners really wanted or needed in order to really provide something different and unique in order to differentiate themselves from the competition. And so that experience has been something that's been done very successfully by a handful of very smaller organizations that control few product within their various market set and have done really well. And so what we wanted to do was take some of the great ideas that they have brought to the table and really scale it to our portfolio and the assets that are deserving of it.
I love it. Adam, you're the managing director for National Office Investor Services. It's so good to see you again. And you are, I think, ostensibly the head of the X2 program. Can you talk a little bit about, at its core, what differentiates X2 from sort of a traditional property management approach that we're probably all familiar with?
Yeah. Well, glad to be back here, Jay. Good to see you. And I think it's been 7.5 months, so your guess was right, since we last spoke. And a lot has changed in those 7.5 months.
No kidding.
Which maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't. But listen, as Preston alluded to, we have watched the office industry change significantly over the last 20, 30 years, and pretty extraordinarily over the last 3 years since COVID had happened. And so the opportunity that we saw was to really elevate the experience of the workplace. And when I think about what our mission and vision is of X2, it's to really change the way that people experience the office. And when we say people, that's anyone and everyone that steps foot into that building, from the property manager that runs that building, to the engineers that help on the operations side, to the tenants that come in and out of that building, the tenants' guests that come in and out of that building, also including our security teams and our janitorial teams and everyone else. And as Preston had mentioned earlier, that evolution was somewhat happening over the last couple of decades, but only accelerated in the last 3 years to really create the opportunity, based on what we were seeing from a customer demand standpoint, to really elevate the experiences at a much more granular, scalable level that we set out to do about 7.5 months ago.
It's interesting, Preston. Do you think, and again, you both nodded to the fact that this idea of being more experience-led differentiators has sort of been around in the industry for a bit, certainly not to the degree that you're pursuing it, but do you think that X2 or something like this would have happened without a pandemic, or do you feel like it was sort of the ignition switch for this kind of decision?
Yeah, I think it eventually would have happened, but as Adam alluded to, basically all the trends that were underway prior to the pandemic just hit like a hyperspace button during COVID. And office buildings had an identity crisis, and a lot of them had to ask, what are we really here for? What purpose are we serving? And at the end of the day, it's to provide kind of the optimal work environment for the tenants and the communities in which they serve. And so when you kind of look at it in that light, providing a curated high level of service per particular tier or subset within the office world made complete sense. And so I think a lot more people since that point have had greater conviction in putting it forward.
Yeah. One of the things that you say at Stream I think is really interesting is that value creation starts with the customer, which I assume is sort of the business case for X2 in many ways. What does that mean to you inside the organization, Preston?
Oh, I just think it just starts and stops with, with the tenant, with the customer. They're the ones that are the lifeblood of the building. And sometimes owners can kind of lose sight of that and focus on other things. And generally when they do, it doesn't end well for them. And so if you just can provide a great work environment, you're responsive, you're proactive, the little things that are done each and every day, if those are met and if they're met with a high degree, you're going to do well.
And Jay, I think to add on to that, what we observed in building X2 was really that the commercial office space had become very transactional from a customer to vendor,
Sure.
office owner, provider, and that it was focused and centered around the financial wherewithal of said customer, around how much space they needed, how much it was going to cost to build out their space. And I think to no fault of anyone in particular, it just became very transactional from a customer relationship standpoint. And the trend that we saw starting, and as Preston said, accelerating after COVID, was the opportunity to maybe reset that customer relationship, and hence the customer at the center of that value creation strategy, to really focus back on the customer, much like other industries have, from hotels to food and beverage to hospitality.
Adam, I know it's come a long way since the first time we talked about this. Do you have some specific examples of sort of the X2 difference, either enhancements inside the properties or elevated experiences that these people get to be a part of each and every day? What does it feel like to work in an X2 enabled building?
Yeah. Last time we spoke, we were actively rolling it out on a single asset.
Yeah.
We're proud to announce that we've actively now rolled it out on 5 assets, and so we have a lot more measurables and data behind us than we did 7.5 months ago. But, to really simplify it down to a handful of things that we think we do differently than the traditional office service providers really starts with who we hire and how we hire. I think that we have historically looked within our own industry for new individuals to bring on to the team. And as with any traditional hiring process, when you stick to the traditional methods, you get traditional results. And so as we talked about getting differentiation, we looked at hiring outside of the commercial real estate world into the F&B business, into the catering community events business, and into the hospitality business. We also enlisted a high-end hotel training program to build a proprietary training for our people, and that was rolled out about 1.5 years ago. And so we're really, really proud of that, and that really changed the mindset of our people before they even stepped foot onto the job, of the expectations that we had and the resources that we were allocating to them to really elevate the entire experience from start to finish. And then lastly, we shifted around really the roles and responsibilities of a traditional property management team. And so, the way that we looked at it from the very beginning was, if we were going to truly elevate it to a whole new level, we had to kind of break the whole thing down and start from scratch. And so, we looked at how we're operating buildings, how we're interacting with tenants, how we're running accounting, how we're running the financial reporting, and really tried to bifurcate and specialize each of those tasks so that there was someone solely dedicated on customer experience, and then giving that individual the empowerment and responsibility to solely focus on customer experience and customer relations, which, believe it or not, was not the way that it's traditionally done. It's kind of an afterthought traditionally of tenant relations, they used to call it, of if you have some extra time, go do some customer interaction. And as I'm sure you guessed, Jay, that didn't work out too well from a customer experience standpoint.
Yeah, you actually call that role now the customer experience manager, right? That's the actual sort of job title.
Correct.
And as somebody who has been writing about and talking about and advising on customer experience for 30 years, I was like, well, of course you should have a customer experience manager. Like, it was like, so like, well, yeah. But then to hear you say, no, nobody's ever done that before. It's always just sort of tenant relations, and it's an afterthought. And I was like, oh, wow, this X2 thing really is quite a bit different. And I love what you said about sort of the hospitality focus, right? Like, treating your responsibility to your tenants and your tenants' guests and even your own team more the way a high-end hotel treats their guests, or a high-end restaurant, et cetera. And that changes the relationship dynamics considerably, right? And it probably takes time for people to be like, oh, wow, this is different than the previous building, or they do interact with us differently now. What kind of feedback do you get from people who actually are in the 5 properties where X2 exists? I mean, do they parrot that back to you? Do you hear those stories like, wow, I can't believe how different it is? And like, what's kind of the feedback loop for you?
Yeah, fortunately, we've implemented some pretty high-end customer experience management surveying systems through
Nice.
a partner. And so we have hundreds of survey responses that we diligently go through and try to pivot and make changes and address issues and opportunities that we have within the building. I think the best way to answer that question, Jay, is really to give you just a real-time example. So,
please, yeah.
At one of the buildings we have in downtown Washington, D.C., we were going through a renovation to the old fitness center, maybe one of the ones that Preston had mentioned from decades ago, to really bring it up to today's standards and expand it and make it look a lot nicer and function a lot nicer. And through our customer experience manager at the building, we understood that the anchor tenant, which in our business is the largest tenant in the building, one of the partners at that firm was a triathlete, and he was using that fitness center on a daily basis while he was at the office to train for his triathlon. And we found out that he wanted and needed that, and it was very important to him. And since he was a partner at the firm, it would also be very important to his firm, since that was where they decided to office and pay us rent. And so we worked out an agreement where we could utilize a fitness center around the corner from that building for the triathlete to utilize while we were under construction. And then we also took it a step further in understanding what specific equipment he would need and want in that fitness center for his triathlon training. And I use that example as we have dozens more like that, where it's like the traditional way that we delivered property management, 99% sure we probably never would have understood or heard anything about that until maybe that tenant was up to renew its lease and said, you know what, I got really frustrated when the fitness center was under construction. No one talked to me. No one helped me try to figure out a solution. And there's a building down the street that has a better customer experience than this building. So I think that's a good example of, elevating the experience and really trying to curate and customize each of our interactions.
That's amazing. How's the triathlon going? We have an update? We got to know.
Yeah, we got to call the team on the ground and check in on that.
Yeah, we got to check that out.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the feedback mechanism in the surveys. Have you always done that, or is that sort of part of the X2 differentiator, is more opportunities for feedback amongst tenants and other important folks?
Yeah, so probably not surprisingly, we have had surveying tools historically, but much like I think the prioritization of tenant relations versus other tasks, that surveying tool was very limited and only delivered typically one time per year. And as someone as
kind of as a
experienced
necessary evil.
Yeah.
And especially as someone as experienced as you in the customer experience world, you would be embarrassed to see this thing as we were when we looked at what we were utilizing. And so we engage Qualtrics, which is a pretty well-known customer experience management tool, to create a 25-question survey that we deliver on a quarterly basis that gets as detailed as how is the fitness center functioning? Are there any additional equipment or services that you would like to see there? All the way through to how's our security team doing? How's our janitorial team doing? How's our property management team? And then with that data, we also added, which I know you'll be proud to hear, but we added a Net Promoter Score, which also, believe it or not, Jay, is a term that no one in our industry knows. And so we began tracking, I think, one of the first buildings in all of commercial real estate, Net Promoter Score at these assets. And we're really proud to report that we're above 80, which I know you know what that means. A lot of people,
strong.
Maybe listeners don't know, but 80 is kind of the high water mark that you try to get to on an NPS score. And we're very proud to be continuing to achieve an 80-plus NPS score. And we'll continue to send surveys, maybe to the dismay of some people taking them, but we do get people to take them. And I think most importantly, as you probably can attest to, we try to take action with them, right? It's not a check the box and set it and forget it. It's what's the actual comments that are coming through when we see a positive score, and we can expand on those services because of that positive score, or a negative score, and we can immediately address it, like the triathlete example, and try to solve the solution.
Yeah, people don't hate surveys. People hate surveys that don't do any good. Right? They hate surveys that don't get read, because then it's like, I'm giving you my time, and for what exactly? And so one of the key pieces to that is to make sure that people know that you are reading the surveys, and that it's actually having an effect. So hopefully, folks in the building watch this conversation and like, oh yeah, that's why we got the triathlete. Like they understand that it actually does work. And then everybody's like, okay, yeah, I'll keep making my recommendations to you. Preston, do you think tenants have a different expectation post-pandemic about kind of what their office space can or should do for them, or again, is this just sort of a natural evolution?
I think that they do. The short answer, and I think that a lot of it, has to do just with what population types are really expanding into the workplace environment right now, and which ones are going the other direction. And I think it's very clear that the millennial workforce places a major emphasis on work-life balance, and I think that's great. And I think that my generation, Gen X, and the generations prior are probably guilty, of not having done as much of that. And so I think there is that momentum that's kind of behind that in all of these conversations, and so we're certainly kind of seeing that trend. I think also what we're also seeing is just less workforce participation. And so as a result, you just have much more leverage on the employee side versus the employer, and to where not only is there a demand for greater experience, but it's backed with some teeth, in that if they don't like it, they'll just leave because they've got several other job offers. Even right now in fourth quarter of 2023, in spite of what some might be calling a mild recession here over the last year. And so I think a lot of that is really putting the task to employers to say, okay, look, all right, we really have to listen. Otherwise, we start getting into other metrics we don't like turnover ratio and whatnot, and that'll absolutely kill a company. So what can we do in order to create kind of this optimal work environment where most employers, if not all of them, still fully believe that you have to be in the office in order to really be at your peak productivity? So in light of that, what can we be doing to get our employees back in order to make sure that we're hitting kind of peak efficiency, peak profitability from a company standpoint, but at the same time keeping our constituents happy? And so, of course, X2's just dovetailed really nicely into that.
I think the other thing I'd add, Jay, and we talked quickly about this last time because I know you were referencing your friend that owns a coffee shop around the corner, but the alternatives to workspace have drastically changed over the last 3 years, where prior to COVID, I think your option of workspace was going to your office where, majority of people went, or probably some pretty dysfunctional or unfunctional home office that
Yep.
had an uncomfy chair, maybe had some spotty Wi-Fi. Obviously, in March of 20, we were all forced to create a functioning home workspace. And then I think the alternative spaces, from the coffee shops like your friend around the corner to gyms started opening co-working spaces. Traditional co-working companies had, like WeWork and Regus and Industrious, started expanding. And so the competition we saw from a traditional office use expanded greatly. And so we had to start to compete with competitors that we traditionally, if ever, have not had to compete with. And, I think as part of that, we also looked at what are some of the things that those spaces offer that a traditional office building doesn't, and tried to overlay that with expanded scope of services, expanded amenities, and then obviously always rooted and centered around customer experience.
I think it was about, 250 days ago or something like that when we talked last. This year has been weird, right? There's been a lot of changes in commercial in 2023. So what are those changes been, the ones that sort of matter the most to you? And have the changes, even since the last time we spoke, have they altered how you have rolled out X2? I mean, have you made kind of course corrections or improvements along the way, just sort of based on what a wild year it's been?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. And I was actually, I know I'm from Chicago, but as you can tell by the picture behind me, I'm actually in Dallas right now. And I just had lunch with one of our co-founders, and we were talking about the roller coaster of 2023. And, for listeners that aren't familiar with commercial real estate, the interest rate hikes that have happened over 2023 have been pretty impactful to our industry: office, industrial, data center, multifamily, and others. And so, as it relates to how it's impacted our industry, Jay, I think it's really caused some pause on just big decisions as it relates to selling a building, buying a building, maybe a big tenant moving into a building or relocating from an existing building, which fortunately for the operations side, like office property management and X2 specifically, I think has created opportunities for us to find ways to create value without some major transaction, whether someone's selling the building or buying the building, and even investing significant capital into buildings. And so, we had one of our property management leaders, I think, said it best, is that why can't our people be the amenities of this building? Why does the fitness center and why does the conference center and the lounge and maybe the rooftop bar need to be amenities? Our people are the amenities of this building and can be and should be. And so we've recognized it. Fortunately, a lot of our clients have recognized that there's an opportunity for a pretty limited capital spend to significantly change the way that your office building operates and customers experience it. And ultimately, through 250 days of data, as you referenced, we've actually seen measurable data points to show that. We've increased physical occupancy at these buildings.
Wow.
We've increased the number of prospect tours that we've had. We've renewed tenants at almost 100%, and we expect and hopefully we'll continue to see pretty significant impacted measurables as it relates to the success of elevating the customer experience.
Oh, it's amazing to see that kind of, not just the net promoter score we talked about earlier, but that kind of line level ROI in terms of renewals and inbound inquiries and things like that. That's really extraordinary. Preston, when you hear that kind of data, does it make you want to apply X2 to all the properties in the portfolio, and is that even realistic?
Well, that data has been what has been missing ever since I've been in the business. Just to talk about that specifically real quick. A lot of us that are on the front lines, talking with tenants every day, we know in our gut that if you provided a higher level of service, you would get rewarded for it. But it has been so difficult to really articulate what that means.
Yeah, no attribution modeling.
Yeah, there is no attribution model. And so what we have really sought out to do over the last couple of years, thanks to Adam's efforts, is really try to find a way to quantify the qualitative. And so that survey and the various ones and questions that we put together, it really cuts two ways in a good way. most importantly, it helps us better understand where we can be doing better in order to provide an optimal experience, to our customers. But secondly, it helps us and better quantify what we are doing to show future clients just the real value that providing quality customer service can do to their building. The industry standard has probably been around 70% on tenant renewal. If we can take that retention percentage up, well above that, that's going to be a massive windfall opportunity for our clients. If we can increase rents, if we can reduce the amount of time that space is sitting idly, not being leased, all of that will contribute to the dollar and cents of making it a more profitable investment. And so all the stuff that we've always inherently known about that customer service will provide a better ROI through the surveying that we've been able to do, and I think that surveying only gets stronger the more assets that we start to put in within X2 to be able to really not just articulate but then predict just what that return will be on future assets. So it's been huge.
Do you think it's easier to implement X2 in a new build as opposed to retrofitting an existing building that you're already in, or does it not matter?
I love that question because my answer has changed since we kind of set off on building X2. Because I would tell you initially the thought was it has to be the nicest, newest, baddest building in any market. And as we did our research, which was pretty extensive, and as Preston mentioned a little bit earlier, but we toured a lot of assets, office assets, hotels, co-working spaces. We tried to collect a lot of data before we built this business. But what we found after kind of reviewing that data and reviewing the on-the-ground information from our markets was really that those new, really highly quality trophy buildings didn't need additional services and additional efforts and resources focused on customer experience because the physical attributes and typically locations kind of took care of everything. Maybe like, a Ferrari compared to a nice Mercedes. And so, what we looked at was that it was that next tier, the buildings maybe that were built 10 years ago or 20 years ago or even sometimes 30 years ago that had some physical constraints that prohibited it from competing with those brand new trophy, brand new properties. And so we really started to focus on the assets that were a tier or two below the brand new, shiniest building in each market, and found that the impact of elevating the experience and focusing on the customer was significantly higher because of the physical constraints and the situation in each of these markets. And as I mentioned, Jay, the initial data has pointed to that's been true.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes perfect sense, right? That if you're going to lead with human capital and sort of customer experience differentiators on the interpersonal level, that if you've got the greatest view and the best everything, that might get overlooked a little bit. I think that's really, really a fascinating thing that you've uncovered there, Adam, and certainly helps the organization probably plan out which buildings are going to be X2 in the future. I have a question about that, actually. I wanted to ask you. I don't think we talked about this before either. Do people in the building know that they're being sort of X2ified? Is there like we put a window cling on the front door now with X2, and what's the messaging to them? Like, sorry, we weren't that good before, but now we're going to be great. It just feels like a little bit of an awkward rollout to me, or maybe I'm not getting it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we've had that question asked multiple times, including asking ourselves that question. And I would tell you that we are agnostic to how much or how little branding X2 needs and wants to be at each of these buildings. I think one of the unique things about our industry is that there's a lot of conflicting brands at the property level, from who the equity investor is to maybe who the local operator is to who the property manager is to the leasing. And as Preston mentioned earlier, we sometimes do all of that, and so it's pretty easy to just throw X2 by stream on that. But when we are doing third-party services and representing a big institutional investor, and then we have a property management team and our leasing team, and then we have X2 layered on top of it. We have to become somewhat agnostic to what the building brand is, what the equity investors brand is. And so at the end of the day, we hope that we're building some brand equity and brand loyalty across markets and specifically in markets. But we hope that our main goal is just, if we're looking to change the way that people experience the office, we're looking to do it through our people, and whatever logo they're wearing or whatever the name of the building is, we're indifferent to.
Yeah, and at some point they're going to experience the difference, right? That's the whole point, is that it's an experience you can feel, not necessarily an experience you need to be told about. It's like Fight Club, right? Like, at some level, if you're doing it right, you don't have to tell them about it because they know it's different.
That's maybe a new tagline, X2. It's like Fight Club.
It's like Fight Club. Yeah, that one's free, guys. You can use that. You guys do that. A question I would have on sort of picking buildings and sort of back to that idea, Preston, are there particular markets or geographies that you think are more apt for this kind of program, or does that not really have a bearing on it?
Less of a bearing than you would think. I think, if you're talking about tenants that are, selecting a Class A Tier 1 or Tier 2 asset, there's a lot of self-selection there in terms of them, placing a premium and high quality of service. I think, though, that, in a somewhat odd way, maybe in some of the office markets that are not doing as well, the ownership has certainly had a higher level of receptivity, right? I mean, this is a new concept. Commercial real estate has kind of done things on the property management side the same way for decades. And so there has been, some learning that's been required by some owners to adapt whether the cost benefit of X2 is there or not. Well, if your project is languishing, but has historically done well, and the asset quality has stood the test of time, you have an owner who's much more receptive to try something new. And so that has been, a little bit of an easier entry point for us versus maybe a project that's 95% leased in a really hot submarket. And so, hey, nothing's broken. Why try to implement anything that, could result into the negative? So, yeah, I would say we've seen the rollout. DC has been highly successful. Adam talked about the buildings that we rolled out there. In spite of that submarket, or a couple of the submarkets that these assets are in, or to the contrary. But I think, to me, that even underscores even more the value of it, because the leasing fundamentals have grown substantially there, and you certainly could make the claim in other markets that, well, they just had the wind at your back in a really good bull market. Well, it's been anything but that in the DC market for several years now.
I think, fortunately, also adding to that is that for our customer, maybe different than the airline industry or even maybe the hotel industry, our customer, i.e. the tenants, want pretty much the same thing in all markets that we're in and markets that we're not in, from New York to Chicago to Dallas to Los Angeles. What's interesting is that the specifics and the curation around each of those customers is different, right? As you may imagine, a tenant in New York wants something different than a tenant in Austin. But at the core, which is obviously why we created X2, is they want to be heard, they want to be treated well, and they want to have problems resolved quickly. And so if we can do all of those things and then add specific things on, and we can pick on Austin because I'm in Texas, but keep Austin weird. They do things a little bit different in Austin than they do in our DC location, and
even Dallas, for that matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately for us, this is pretty consistent across all of our markets. It's just getting into the specifics of each of these submarkets and the specifics of these tenant demands where we get the opportunity to curate it.
Preston, you alluded to this earlier, that there is a fee associated with X2, right? So there is it's a premium service with a different price point than sort of non-X2. Did I get that right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So is the idea then to take existing buildings where you are either property manager and or owner and say, okay, we used to do it the traditional way, now we're going to do it the X2 way? Or is it, let's go get new property management opportunities and displace existing competitors because now you're the X2 guys?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a combination of both. I think what Adam and I and the rest of our teams have been doing is really looking at the competitive landscape in all of the markets that we're in and really seeing which assets, based on their location, based on their architecture, based on their age, based on the ownership, a lot of different things, which ones are most suitable for an X2 rollout, and really talking with all of them. And so that's been our approach.
Yep.
And so if you look at the assets that we've converted over to X2, you look at the ones that are in the pipeline right now, where we'll have some announcements here in the next few months on. It's a combination of new and existing alike.
Adam, how long does it take to sort of do that switch over, to go from conventional to sort of X2ify a building? Obviously, probably depends a little bit on the building, but is this like a 30-day turn, a 6-month turn? I know you're talking about hiring new people and changing job roles.
Yeah.
I'm sure retraining, reskilling people.
Yeah, good question. So it's typically about 90 days from start to
Okay.
finish, and majority of that is on the hiring side. Because as we mentioned, we typically are hiring a brand new customer experience manager, which takes a little while. But, fortunately for us, kind of the behind the scenes stuff, from the accounting to the engineering of these buildings, negotiating vendor contracts with security providers and janitorial providers. We've been in that business for 27 years. And
Yeah.
so
Got that
we
part
do
on
that in our sleep, which, I think even the traditional property transition is typically 90 days. And we're doing this elevated property transition in 90 days because we've been doing kind of the stuff people don't talk about for 27 years, and we're really, really good at it. And so we're fortunate to have a really strong foundation of kind of the fundamental property management services like accounting and vendor management and staffing, just to add on the elevated experience, scope of services and staffing and technologies that we've implemented with it.
The fact that you've got real ROI on this program now, even in the last few months, is extraordinary to me. Not only the Net Promoter Score, but retention and renewals and inbound inquiries. It's amazing. But Adam, I think I know you well enough now to suggest that you are probably wondering how long it's going to take for other people to steal this idea. And then how do you protect it, right? Somebody else is going to be the Z2 or something, right? And then you're like, now what? It was our idea. So how do you build a defensible moat around this?
Yeah, great question, Jay. And I guess I should say I probably expected that question as I've gotten to know you.
We
as
probably
well.
shouldn't be recording and releasing this.
Right.
Is probably what we should do. But okay, your word.
Yeah. Listen, I think fortunately for us, if I try to kind of bring it back to Business 101, it's, we've taken, from my standpoint, a commoditized business and tried to decommoditize it, which was obviously part of the business strategy and, where differentiation and strategy comes around. When I look at our competitors, I really see them kind of stuck in the commoditized business. And that's worked out well for them. And typically in the commoditized business, if you're the biggest and the cheapest, you can be wildly successful in any industry, including commercial real estate. What I'm fortunate, to have, and Preston and I and all of our colleagues are fortunate to have, is that we're a privately held, smaller company than a lot of our big competitors, and we can pivot and we can be agile and we can be flexible really, really quickly. And in some cases, even to the extent of doing things totally new and different, like X2 has been, and which we've been working on for about a year and a half. And so, I think at the end of the day, to try to combat our competition, replicating what we've done in X2, I feel like we have the first mover advantage, fortunately, because we saw this opportunity a year and a half ago and have only tried to take it quickly as we have done. And then I think that ultimately it starts and ends with our people. And I think that we have had for our entire existence the best people in the industry, and as we continue to grow over the 27 years, we've kept that front and center, and that starts with the people inside of our walls, and that starts with all the future people that start to work here. And so, if we can attract and retain the most talented people in our industry, and in X2, attract and retain the people that are laser focused and at their core customer experience, I think that we can continue to outpace the competition and hopefully become the leader in changing the way people experience the office.
That's a really interesting point you made there about when you really get X2 deployed, it can make Stream an employer of choice in a really interesting way as well, right? Because people want to work in an X2 building, but people in your industry want to be workers in the X2 environment, right? So you're getting different, better, more creative, more innovative, more problem-solving people on your own team as well because of this initiative. That's actually not something I'd ever really considered before, that it actually helped your own staffing in your own organization by sort of redefining what it means to be in tenant services, et cetera.
I would tell you, I'd love to take credit for that idea, but I have to give credit to Mr. Horst Schulze, who was basically the founder of the Ritz-Carlton, in reading his book, Customer Excellence. But, I think one of the most important things I've learned in this journey and really spending a ton of time learning customer excellence and customer service and customer experience has been that all the training, all the strategies you work on is geared toward the customer, but it's equally, if not more importantly, geared towards your colleagues and your coworkers. And I think Mr. Schulze did that incredibly well, and he talks a lot about it in his book, if you've read it, is that all of this customer service training, all of these strategies, all these standards we're putting in place should be applied to the person standing next to you and the person standing on the other side of you, and how you treat, how you speak, how you dress, how you react, how you address service recovery, the same way as their coworker with the the most important customer that you're facing. And I think we, in rolling out our legendary CX training across the company, took that very, very seriously, and hopefully, to your point, Jay, have created a place where people want to work and are excited to come to work and to provide the highest level of service.
Well, you're definitely on the right track. I mean, it is mathematically proven. I've actually done a lot of research on this point in my own business, but you cannot deliver exceptional customer experience without first delivering exceptional employee experience. One begets the other, and that's not just sloganeering. That's like a proven fact. I actually did an analysis once where I ran a correlation study on best places to work companies and then Net Promoter Score, and the correlation is like extraordinary, and that's not a surprise, right? People who like their job and like the people that they work with are going to naturally let that slosh over into how they deal with customers, and so yeah, I think it's a very forward-looking approach, and I'm delighted that Stream is taking these steps. It's got to be a little bit, Preston, like, wow, we probably should have thought of this 25 years ago. But as is often true in commercial real estate, people have a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset sometimes.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, another reason why we're pretty confident in the success of X2 is it is, in its essence, what Stream is and what a Stream has sought out to do. Our 4 values are nice, smart, honest, passionate. It's that simple. And that's been the way since 1996. And, I like to go back to, the Steve Jobs analogy on when he came out with the AirPod, or excuse me, the iPod. And everybody was saying the same thing. Well, aren't you worried about Microsoft copying you? And they did. It was called the Zune.
Yeah.
And nobody knows what a Zune is today. And it's because it didn't last, because it wasn't put
good.
Out by the it wasn't any good, and it wasn't put out by the leadership and endorsed by the leadership within Microsoft. It was just a haphazard way to see that, okay, wow, our competitive companies come out with something, we need to do something to combat that. But it didn't last. Didn't have the full support of the leadership. Wasn't really well thought. It wasn't a major strategic initiative of their company. And X2 is embraced at the highest levels of Stream because all of us at one point were brokers, within the leadership at Stream. And we have seen firsthand when we were out in the trenches leasing or tenant repping office space or industrial space, the impact that a quality customer environment can provide. And so why not provide that? And so it just became abundantly clear throughout COVID that the trend was not coming this way, but here. And because of our nimble nature, we had the ability to act very quickly.
Adam, how long until, maybe this has already happened, until you've got existing stream clients and properties saying, hey, how can we get us some of that X2, and how come we haven't got X2 yet? Like, are you starting to get that, like, where's my X2? And if you're not yet, you will eventually.
Yeah, not yet, but hopefully we get there very quickly, Jay. But I would tell you, that I think a major reason we've been somewhat in stealth mode as we've gathered the data and the measurables behind it, because we wanted to be 100% certain that what we were doing was actually creating ROI, as we've talked about. And fortunately, everything we've been doing has created ROI, as the measurables speak to, over the last 6 months. We plan to have a lot more conversations across the country over the coming months. And I believe, especially, based on the initial data, that we will be getting a lot of those calls and saying, how about X2 and why not X2? And so hopefully from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah, I know it's going to happen, no question. I mean, once you document it, right, then people will be like, oh, there's a there there, right? And that's why I think it's so smart, the links that you've gone to actually put math around this. Because look, commercial real estate is a business that's driven by ratios and formulas and math. Like, nobody's like taking anything at face value. So the fact that you actually have real data points around it, I think, is going to make all the difference in the world. Because otherwise, I think the orientation in this industry is, yeah, okay, you treat the tenants nice, like, I mean, they're just, that doesn't, it feels fake almost, right? So
that was a great impression. You sound like a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I've been there. Preston, I think one of the other things we haven't talked about that I wanted to touch on briefly is, not only do we have sort of very specific ROI in terms of in this building more people are renewing leases, et cetera, but isn't it true that if this really flowers the way we think it will, and already evidence that it has, that actually creates more value for the property itself? Like, this building is more valuable at sort of the macro level, not the individual tenant level. Is that a story that's worth telling?
100%. 100%. I think one of the first things you learn when you sit down in that first finance class in college is that anytime you have uncertainty, it's looked at negatively in the financial market. There's never a time when you look uncertain and say, oh, the market could be going up. No, if it's uncertain, it's negative. And so at its essence, X2 creates more certainty of the cash flow stream of the office building. With that value, when you're valuing anything, there's a multiple assessed to it. And so with that value, if there's greater certainty, there's generally a higher multiple that's tied to it. So that's the direct correlation.
Yeah, I love it. Adam, last one for you before we wrap it up. What has surprised you in the last few months of rolling this out? I think it was one property last time we talked. Now it's 5. I'm sure there's been some things you didn't expect, positive, negatively. What's been, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. Fortunately, we did a lot of research and a lot of planning, so there hasn't been any extraordinary surprises. And I give all the credit to our local teams that are really running these buildings on a day-to-day basis. But I think the one thing that has surprised me most has been that tenant events are very, very individualized. And as tenant events that I believe would be really, really powerful and well-attended have not been. Mm-hmm. For example, I like working out and I like doing yoga, and so we rolled out some pretty extensive fitness tenant engagements in our downtown DC buildings, and they were not very well attended, but the minute we did a wine tasting event, 50 people showed up on a Thursday afternoon to go through wine tasting. So I think what we've learned and continue to learn is that each building has individual needs and wants, and we need to be highly, highly cognizant of those and really address it on a curated, customized basis. And I know if we need a tequila event, who to call, Jay?
You want an X2 tequila tasting event in every building in this country, you've come to the right place, my friend. And I am not at all kidding. We actually do that. We do a lot of tequila education classes and tastings for corporate clients all over the country. So yeah, we can make that happen.
You're hired.
And
We
I
will
guarantee we'll
we
get
will
more
make
people
that
tequila
happen.
than yoga. I guarantee.
Yeah,
I'm taking
well-
a personal challenge.
We'll put you as the chief tequila officer, at a couple of these projects for sure.
I always thought that's what CTO stood for. And apparently it's not. That was a shock to me, actually.
Not yet.
How many more buildings are you gonna roll out next year?
We hope to roll out a couple dozen. So
Wow.
we've got 15 or so days to get ready for 24. So
That's
we're ready.
exciting. I had no idea. A couple of dozen more. Wow, you're really scaling this thing now.
Yeah, again, we're fortunate to have all the systems in place in all of these markets, and so these aren't new entries, maybe like a traditional kind of new business. We
Yeah.
have 90% of the necessary resources and elements that we need to open in X2, and so fortunately we've got almost a half dozen up and running, and we have the data and the information of how to do it, and so it's just getting the right opportunities and getting going next year.
Getting the people. Yeah. Preston, when you tour some of these buildings, does it feel different? Like, this is probably a stupid question, but like when you're there on site and you're like, this is a building that has X2, does it just have a different vibe, or am I reading way too much into this?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you go into most office lobbies and, you're not greeted, immediately, and it can have a rather kind of cold, welcoming experience. And, X2 is anything but that. I mean, you look at, the top hotel lines and brands around the world.
Yeah.
Architecturally, they're all very similar. They all have very similar amenities, like we've talked about on the office side, but where people really pay up is for that service. And so that's something that we're seeking to replicate. And so if you can, all of a sudden, if you're going into work every day and you're greeted by, your first and your last name, that's something that's very rare in most office environments. And it's little things like that that people really pick up on. And they may not even know it, a lot of times, just subconsciously, where all of a sudden it's a little thing here, little thing there, and there's just something different about this place. And yes, 100%. You walk through there, it may not come to, the front of your brain, but particularly after a series of times that you've been there, that you're in a very special and unique place, and that's the goal.
I love that. Let's demonstrate it. Next time we have a conversation, let's do it in a building. Let's do it on site.
It's a great
idea.
And actually, really dig in. Maybe even interview some people who work in the building. Like, hey, what's it like to work here? Like, let's make a little movie. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I appreciate it. Gents, congratulations on the success. Wow, you've come a long way this year, and what a crazy year to do it too. Really appreciate your time, and congrats on the progress. Cannot wait to see where this goes next. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate your time.
Jay, thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.